My parents sold their house and gave $650,000 to my brother. Then tried to invade my home like they owned it until what I did next left them reeling. I'm Timothy, 38 years old, and I've been married to my wife Sarah for 6 years. She's a brilliant software engineer who makes excellent money, while I've built a thriving custom woodworking business from absolutely nothing. We own 2 properties in suburban Denver, our comfortable family home in Highlands Ranch, and a smaller investment property in Lakewood that I bought 3 years ago. My tenants, Jake and Amanda, are dream renters who pay on time and never cause trouble. But here's where my family enters the picture like a tornado through a trailer park. My parents raised 2 sons, me and my younger brother Derek, who's 35. I swear on everything holy, this man has never worked a legitimate job in his entire adult life. Since graduating from Colorado State, which my parents funded completely, he's bounced between ridiculous business ventures that always end up draining my parents' retirement savings. Meanwhile, when I wanted to start my woodworking business, did I get family support? Hell no. Dad told me it was too risky and I should find a stable job with health insurance. But when Derek announced he was an entrepreneur, suddenly it was all about nurturing his vision and believing in his potential. Derek recently got engaged to this woman Brittany, who has champagne taste on a beer budget. She's constantly posting Instagram stories of designer handbags and weekend trips to Vail, funded by God knows what since neither of them actually works. Derek claims he's between ventures, which means living off my parents' generosity while exploring new opportunities. Brittany doesn't work either because she's busy wedding planning and building her personal brand, which consists of makeup tutorials for her 923 Instagram followers. 3 months ago, my parents called with exciting news. They were selling the family house in Littleton, a beautiful ranch-style home they'd owned for 30 years, worth about $650,000 in today's market. I figured they were finally ready to downsize, maybe move to one of those active adult communities in Castle Rock. Made perfect sense for folks in their late 60s. Mom was bubbling with enthusiasm about getting such a great price and starting this new chapter. I was genuinely happy for them. They'd worked hard their entire lives and deserved to enjoy retirement. Dad had put in 30 years with Excel Energy, and Mom had been a dedicated elementary school teacher. Then she dropped the bombshell that would change everything. We gave all the money to Derek as a wedding gift. I literally thought I'd misheard her. You gave him what now? All of it, Timothy. $650,000. He found this gorgeous penthouse in Lodo and we wanted to help him start his new life with Brittany. I'm doing rapid math in my head. If this downtown penthouse costs more than $650,000, and they gave Derek everything from the house sale, where exactly were my parents planning to live? Turns out Derek had found a $1.4 million glass tower penthouse in Denver's trendy lower downtown district, complete with mountain views and a concierge service. My parents had handed over their entire life savings as a down payment, and Derek planned to finance the rest. On what income? That's still the million-dollar question nobody seemed to be asking. What about your retirement? I asked Mom, my stomach already dropping. Oh, we have it all figured out, she said with that cheerful obliviousness that would soon drive me to the edge. We're moving into your rental house. Just like that. Not, would you consider, or could we discuss, or even, do you think that might work? No, a straight-up declaration that they were commandeering my investment property like they were claiming territory in the Wild West. Did you discuss this with Jake and Amanda? I managed to ask. Apparently, that wasn't necessary because I could just tell my tenants to pack up and leave. You know, break a legal lease and screw over 2 people who'd never done anything wrong, all because my parents needed somewhere to live after giving away their house money to fund Derek's luxury lifestyle. The entitlement was absolutely breathtaking. They'd made this massive financial decision without consulting anyone, handed over their security to bankroll my brother's penthouse dreams, and then just assumed I'd solve their housing crisis by destroying my rental income and legal obligations. When I told them that absolutely wasn't happening, Dad's voice turned cold faster than a Colorado winter. We raised you, Timothy. This is what family does for each other. Family. The same family that paid for Derek's college but not mine. The same family that funded his failed businesses while telling me to be more realistic. The same family that just handed him $650,000 while expecting me to provide free housing. I told them I'd call them back and hung up. Sarah was standing in our kitchen doorway. She'd heard enough to know exactly what was happening. Please tell me you're not actually considering this, she said. Not for a second, I replied, but I know this is just the beginning. My parents don't take no for an answer, especially when they think they're entitled to something. And they clearly believed they were entitled to my rental property. I had no idea how ugly this was about to get. Last Tuesday, I'm in my workshop putting the finishing touches on a custom dining table when my phone starts blowing up. Jake was calling, and something in my gut told me to answer immediately. "Timothy, we need help." His voice was shaking. "There are people at our front door claiming they own this house." My stomach dropped like a stone. "What do you mean claiming they own it?" "They have suitcases and they're pounding on the door, screaming at us to pack up and get out. The woman keeps yelling that this is their house now and we're trespassing." I already knew who it was, but I had to ask. "Did they give you names?" "They said they're your parents." Of course they did. I told Jake not to open the door under any circumstances and that I was racing over. I dropped everything, didn't even turn off my table saw, just grabbed my keys and tore out of there. The drive across Denver was surreal. Part of me kept thinking maybe there was some misunderstanding, but deep down I knew exactly what was happening. I pulled up to the Lakewood house and there they were, Mom and Dad on the front porch with 2 enormous suitcases and shopping bags from King Soopers, like they were moving in for an extended vacation. Mom was hammering on the door with her fist while Dad stood there looking all authoritative, like some landlord collecting overdue rent. "This is ridiculous." Mom was shouting. "We know you're in there. Open this door right now." I could see Jake and Amanda's curtains twitching. They were probably terrified but smart enough not to answer. When my parents saw me approaching, Mom immediately switched from furious to relieved. "Timothy, thank goodness you're here. These people won't leave." "Mom, what are you doing?" "We're moving in. We told you we needed somewhere to live. And I told you that wasn't happening." Dad stepped forward with that stern expression he used to intimidate me as a kid. "Son, we've been staying at a Hampton Inn for 2 weeks waiting for you to handle this situation. 2 weeks in a hotel. Instead of, I don't know, looking for an apartment or calling a realtor or doing literally anything responsible adults do when they need housing. You've been staying at a hotel because you chose to sell your house and give the money away," I said firmly. "That's not my problem to solve. We're your parents and they're just tenants," Dad shot back. "They're tenants with a legal lease." That's when Mom completely lost it. Started screaming about how ungrateful I was, how they'd sacrificed everything for their children, how a good son would take care of his parents. The entire neighborhood could hear her meltdown. Dad tried a different approach. "Look, we already checked out of the hotel. Our reservation's up today. We literally have nowhere else to go." Notice how their poor planning was supposed to become my emergency. They'd painted themselves into a corner and expected me to solve it by screwing over 2 innocent people. Jake cracked the door just enough to peek out. "Is everything okay? Should we call someone?" "Everything's fine," I told him. "My parents are leaving." "We are not leaving." Mom shrieked. "This is family property." That's when I completely lost my patience. "This is MY property. I bought it with MY money from MY business that I built with zero help from either of you." Dad launched into his guilt trip playbook. "After everything we did for you?" "What exactly did you do for me, Dad? Because I'm having trouble remembering all this help you're talking about." He started stammering about raising me and providing for me, but I cut him off. "You provided the legal minimum required to avoid child neglect charges. Meanwhile, you're currently funding Derek's penthouse lifestyle while demanding I give you free housing." Mom was crying now, doing that manipulative victim routine she'd perfected over the years. "Where are we supposed to go?" "Literally anywhere that isn't my rental property." Jake spoke up again. "Should I call the police?" Both my parents whipped around to stare at him like he'd suggested calling in an airstrike. "You wouldn't dare involve police in a family matter," Dad snarled. "He absolutely would," I replied calmly. "And so would I. You're trespassing." What happened next was like watching a controlled demolition of every family relationship I'd ever known. Mom started screaming about how I was choosing strangers over family, how she was ashamed to have raised such a selfish son, how my late grandma Rose would be rolling in her grave. Dad went straight for the jugular. "Your brother would never treat us like this." "You're absolutely right," I shot back. "Derek would take your money and let you live in your car. At least I'm being honest about saying no." I turned to Jake. "If they're not off this property in 5 minutes, call 911. "This isn't over," Dad growled as he grabbed their suitcases. They loaded everything back into their silver Honda CR-V, Mom crying the whole time about what a terrible son I was. The last thing I heard before they drove off was Dad yelling that I'd regret this. After they left, I apologized profusely to Jake and Amanda for the drama. Turns out they'd been hiding in their bedroom for 20 minutes before I arrived, genuinely scared these unhinged people might break down the door. I gave them my direct cell number and told them to call immediately if my parents showed up again. I also said I'd completely understand if they wanted to break their lease early after this harassment. But I knew my parents weren't finished. People who think they're entitled to your property don't just give up after one rejection. They escalate. The next day my phone started ringing constantly, every hour on the hour. Different numbers, different relatives, all delivering the same basic message. I was a terrible son abandoning his parents. First call came from my Aunt Patricia at 7 a.m. sharp. I'm barely conscious, coffee hasn't even finished brewing, and she's laying into me about family values and respecting your elders. Timothy, how could you do this to them? They're your parents. I tried explaining the situation, but she cut me off immediately. I don't want to hear excuses. Figure out a way to help them. Then she hung up on me. An hour later, my cousin Brandon called. Haven't talked to this guy in probably 3 years, but suddenly he's very concerned about my character. Same script, how could I abandon family? What kind of person chooses money over parents? They raised you, man. You owe them. They raised Derek too, and he's the one with their money. That's different. How is it different? Click. Another hang-up. This pattern continued all day long. By noon, I'd received 8 phone calls and probably 15 text messages. The texts were the worst part, long guilt trips about family loyalty, how my parents had sacrificed everything for their kids, how I was breaking their hearts. My phone kept buzzing every few minutes with another message from another relative who'd apparently been recruited for this harassment campaign. Here's what really got me. Not one of these people asked for my side of the story. Not one said, "Hey, what's actually happening here?" They all just accepted my parents' version of events and decided I was the villain. My cousin Stephanie sent me this long Facebook message about how my parents were living like refugees in a hotel. Where were all these concerned relatives when I was working 3 jobs to pay for college at CU Boulder? Where was the family loyalty when my parents were bankrolling Derek's failed ventures for 15 years? Every single one of these righteous family members had very strong opinions about what I should do, but somehow none of them had spare bedrooms or guest houses available. When I pointed this out to Aunt Patricia during her second guilt trip call of the day, she got all flustered. Well, we don't have the space. I don't have space either. That's why I rent it to people. You have more money. There was the real reason. Because I'd worked my ass off and built a successful business, I was obligated to solve everyone else's problems. Because I'd been responsible with my finances, I should subsidize everyone else's terrible decisions. By Wednesday I'd had enough. I sat down that night and wrote the most comprehensive email of my life. Took me about 2 hours to get it exactly right. I wanted to be clear, factual, and impossible to misinterpret. Subject line, setting the record straight, the full story. I started with a timeline. Parents sell house for $650,000. Parents give all money to Derek for penthouse down payment. Parents announce they're moving into my rental property without asking. I say no and offer to help them find appropriate housing. They refuse and demand I evict my legal tenants. Then I attach documentation, screenshots of text messages, photos of the lease agreement, even property records showing when I bought the house and how much I paid. I wanted everyone to see exactly what they were asking me to do. The email was probably 2,000 words long. I went through everything point by point, but the best part was the ending. I listed every person who had called or texted me about family duty and obligation. Then I wrote, since everyone is so concerned about my parents' housing situation, I'm sure one of you will be happy to provide them with a place to stay. After all, family helps family, right? Please let me know your move-in date for mom and dad so I can give them your address. I hit send at 11 p.m. Wednesday night to 30 people. My phone was silent Thursday morning. First time in 3 days I wasn't woken up by angry relatives. Around noon, responses started trickling in. They fell into 3 categories. People who suddenly remembered they didn't really have space after all. People who went radio silent completely. And people who doubled down and got even nastier. Uncle Robert was in category 3. Sent me this long dramatic reply about how I was destroying the family and turning my back on the people who made me who I am. Really over-the-top stuff about dishonoring my ancestors and breaking sacred family bonds. I replied with one sentence, "What's your move-in date?" He never responded. The family Facebook group went completely silent. All those posts about duty and respect just disappeared. Funny how that works. By Friday, the harassment campaign had ended as quickly as it started. Either people realized they'd been fed a one-sided story, or they figured out I wasn't backing down. I called Derek directly Friday afternoon. He picked up on the first ring like he'd been expecting it. "Tim, what the hell did you send to everyone?" "The truth." "You got a problem with that?" You're making the whole family look bad. We went back and forth for about 10 minutes. He tried every manipulation tactic. How mom and dad needed help, how I was being selfish, how family should stick together. All the same garbage I'd been hearing all week. Finally, I cut to the point. You've got their money, Derek. You figure out their housing. I hung up and waited to see what would happen next. Didn't have to wait long. The first sign something was seriously wrong came from my cousin Maria. Basically the only family member who'd stayed neutral during this whole mess, probably because she's got her own drama and doesn't have time for more. She texted me one Tuesday afternoon, "Hey, did you know Derek is having problems with his penthouse purchase?" I hadn't heard anything, but it didn't surprise me. Financing a $1.4 million place when you've never had steady employment tends to be complicated. What kind of problems? I texted back. Bank is asking for employment verification and income statements. Apparently that's harder to provide than he thought. No kidding. Turns out banks actually want proof you can repay massive loans. Revolutionary concept. Over the next few weeks, the full story emerged through the family grapevine. The bank had initially pre-approved Derek based on my parents' down payment and some projections about his consulting business. But when final approval time came, they wanted actual documentation, pay stubs, tax returns, bank statements, all that boring paperwork proving you're not just some deadbeat looking to live beyond your means. Problem was, Derek didn't have any of that because he doesn't actually make money. His consulting business was basically him calling himself an entrepreneur and occasionally meeting people for coffee to discuss opportunities. No clients, no contracts, no revenue, just a website he'd paid someone to build and some business cards. The bank laughed him out of the office. Without the loan, he couldn't buy the penthouse. Without buying the penthouse, he couldn't get his deposit back. And that deposit was a huge chunk of my parents' house money. But wait, it gets better. Derek and Brittany had been planning this massive wedding. We're talking 250+ guests, fancy venue at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs, open bar, the whole production. Because when you're living off your parents' retirement fund, why not go all out? The venue wanted final payment 2 weeks before the ceremony. Derek called my parents asking them to cover it since they'd already invested so much in his future. My parents had to explain they'd given him literally everything and were currently living in a one-bedroom apartment they could barely afford. So Derek started reaching out to family members for loans, and I use quotes because we all knew he wasn't planning to pay anyone back. I got a text too. "Tim, I know we've had our differences, but I could really use help with the venue payment. It's only $18,000. Only $18,000. Like that's pocket change." I didn't even reply. Apparently, nobody else helped Derek either, because the Broadmoor ended up canceling their booking 3 days before the wedding. They had the ceremony in Brittany's parents' backyard in Aurora instead. Half the guests didn't show up due to the last-minute venue change. According to Maria, Brittany cried through most of the reception about how this wasn't her dream wedding. Meanwhile, the same week as their backyard wedding disaster, I closed on my third property, a small commercial building in Golden that needed work but had incredible potential. I got it $45,000 under market value because the previous owner was motivated to sell. I posted a simple photo on Instagram of the keys and paperwork. Another project in the works. Sometimes patience pays off. Nothing dramatic, just a normal business update. Several family members liked the post. I noticed my parents didn't. But the story wasn't over yet. My parents were about to make one final, desperate play that would cross every line imaginable. Last Saturday morning, Sarah and I were having coffee in our kitchen, discussing baby names and looking at paint samples for the nursery. Perfect, peaceful morning. Exactly the kind of quiet family time I'd been looking forward to. Then our Ring doorbell started going off. I checked my phone and saw my parents standing on our front porch, both dressed up nice. Mom was holding flowers and what looked like a grocery bag. Dad had this weird, forced smile like he was trying to sell me something. They were talking directly to the camera like it was a video call. "Timothy, we know you're home," Mom said in this artificially sweet voice. "We can see your car in the driveway." I looked at Sarah. She was already shaking her head. "We brought groceries to cook for you," Dad chimed in, holding up the bag. "Your mother wants to make that pot roast you used to love." The manipulation was incredible. They'd shown up uninvited with props designed to make me feel guilty, flowers and food like this was some normal family visit instead of another boundary violation. "We've been thinking about everything that happened," Mom continued to the camera. "We made mistakes. We should have asked permission about the rental house. Too little too late. About 8 months too late." I watched this whole performance on my phone while sitting 20 feet away from them. After months of harassment, manipulation, and trying to destroy my business relationships, they thought they could just show up with flowers and reset everything. I'm not answering the door, I told Sarah. But my parents weren't giving up. They stood there for 10 minutes taking turns talking to the camera, explaining how sorry they were and how much they missed me. Mom even started crying, doing that victim routine she'd perfected over the years. When it became obvious I wasn't coming to the door, Dad's tone changed. Timothy, this is ridiculous. We're your parents. Open the door so we can talk like adults. That's when I made my decision. I called the police non-emergency line. I need to report trespassing. I have individuals on my property who refuse to leave, and I have a previous incident report involving the same people. Sometimes you have to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your sanity. I chose sanity and I've never been happier,